Hello, everyone, and welcome to another lecture for International Reporting. Today we'll be talking about China, arguably the most important country in Asia, and one with which the United States has had a turbulent relationship over time. So, in looking at the map, these are the various provinces of China, and the capital, Beijing, is here, and Shanghai, the largest city, is here. I spent a lot of time down here in Guangdong province, in the third largest city, Guangzhou, which is just across from Hong Kong. Over here you have Tibet, with which the central government has had a variety of problems, and Xinjiang, which is where the Uyghurs or the Muslim population exists. You can see the borders here with North Korea, Russia, the stands, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan's here, Pakistan, and India. Currently an ongoing dispute between China and India. So just to give you a sense of its geographic area, also China borders Vietnam, Laos, Burma, Bhutan. Here's where Mount Everest is located. Made a visit there. Interesting place to see. So the history. Peking Man, the remains of the oldest individual so far in terms of history, was found near Beijing in 1927. It's from about 400,000 years ago. The first recognized dynasty, the Shah, lasted from about 2200 to 1750 BC and marked the beginning of a long period of cultural development, which moved into a more urbanized civilization of the Shang dynasty from 1750 to 1050 BC. Intellectual life developed during the Shang period and flourished in the next dynasty, the Zhou, from 1040 to 250 BC. The great schools of intellectual thought, Confucianism and others, all developed during the Zhou dynasty. The Chinese Empire, if you will, began during the Qin dynasty from 221 to 206 BC. Although it was short-lived, the Qin dynasty set up the lasting unification structures such as legal codes, procedures, forms of writing, coinage, and a pattern of thought and scholarship. If you've seen advertisements for the Terracotta Warriors, this is from the Qin dynasty. It's a great site. I've now seen it several times. Amazing stuff. The Qin dynasty was succeeded by the Han dynasty from 206 BC to 220 AD. And under the Han, a combination of strict legalism and Confucianism, known as Han Confucianism, became the ruling norm in Chinese culture for the next 2,000 years. In fact, 95% of all Chinese see their hereditary marks and their family markings going back to the Han dynasty. The Chinese also left enduring marks on the people beyond their borders, especially those of Korea, Japan, and Vietnam, both positive and negative. The empire ended in 1911. It was brought down as a result of revolution, essentially. The various players in the regional warlords fought one another, but united to depose the emperor at the time, who was a young boy. The end of imperial rule was followed by nearly 4 decades of major socio-economic development and socio-political discord. The initial establishment of a Western-style government, the Republic of China, was followed by several efforts to restore the throne. The invasion of Manchuria and China by Imperial Japan and the ensuing chaos of World War II essentially ushered in the Civil War. The main figure in the revolutionary movement that overthrew imperial rule was Sun Yat-sen, seen to be the father of China, of modern China, George Washington-esque, if you will. And he, along with other Republican political leaders, endeavored to establish a parliamentary democracy, which unfortunately did not last long. So, between democracy and communism, Sun Yat-sen eventually had to turn to the Soviet Union for inspiration and assistance. And the Soviets obliged Sun and his Nationalist Party to allow Soviet advisors in terms of establishing political and military training activities. A key individual in these developments was Chiang Kai-shek, is how we know him, one of Sun's lieutenants from the early revolutionary days. But Moscow also supported the new Chinese Communist Party, so they were kind of playing both sides, which was founded by Mao Zedong and others in Shanghai in 1921. So when Jiang Jieshi, or Chiang Kai-shek, as we know him in kind of the English dialect, succeeded Sun Yat-sen, he broke with his Soviet advisors and with the communists, and in 1927 was successful in defeating the northern warlords and unifying China. The years 1928 to 1937 are often referred to as the Nanjing dynasty because of the nationalist development that took place under Jiang's presidency before World War II, when China's capital was in Nanjing. The Nanjing government received international recognition as the sole legitimate government of China, but that changed. Communists took over after a civil war, which broke out in 1946, just after World War II ended, and the Kuomintang forces were defeated and had retreated to a few offshore islands and Taiwan by 1949. Mao and the other communist leaders established the capital in Beijing, and the communist takeover of the mainland in 1949 set the stage for a budding new society built on Marxist-Leninist models with class struggle and proletarian politics fashioned and directed by the Communist Party. The People's Republic of China, you may have heard it referred to as the PRC, was established on October 1st, 1949, when it felt there was a possible attack from the United States, which at the time was at war with North Korea. And China supported North Korea in the Korean War. And that was the beginning of the problems between the United States and Communist China. Some facts. The population it goes back and forth between India and China in terms of the largest population in the world. The population of China last year was 1.34 billion people. It's run by the communists. President and vice president are elected by the National People's Congress for a 5-year term. But it used to be restricted to only 2 terms, but President Xi has changed that, and he can go on past the end of his 2nd term. The major cities are Shanghai with 22 million people, Beijing with 20 million, and Guangzhou with 13 million. There are many cities throughout China that have 1 million people or more. As I said, the chief of state is President Xi Jinping. He was elected in 2013, which means he's now in his 2nd term of office. Xi Jinping was born in 1953. His father was a revolutionary military leader. Xi studied chemical engineering. He pushed for a market-driven economy in the country. He's fought corruption, but he's also seen as an incredibly strong leader, who has cracked down on any form of democratic leanings. He's cracked down on the media, and most recently cracked down on Hong Kong. So China has gone through economic disasters and reform. President Zhou Enlai uh, was the premier under Mao Zedong. Many of these were directed by Mao Zedong, and they were massive failures. The Great Leap Forward in 1958 to 59, the Cultural Revolution from 1966 to 1976, when Mao died, created massive economic problems. It's worth noting that China broke with the Soviet Union in 1959, fought a border war with India in 1962, and also fought with Soviet troops in 1969. In in the 1980s, Vice Premier Deng Xiaoping, who died in 1997, really brought back the ability for the United States and China to talk with one another. He pushed economic reforms. He was involved with getting recognition by the United States of China. He also was the one who ordered the crackdown on Tiananmen Square in 1989. So that on one side he did good economic issues for his fellow countrymen and cracked down when there was a call for reform. Since the late 1970s, China has moved from a closed, centrally planned system to a more market-oriented one that plays a major global role. In 2010, China became the world's largest exporter. There are controls over certain industries which are government controlled, telecommunications, satellites, anything to do with defense, the media, so that while there are many industries that have relatively free market, there are also some that are supported by the state. Tibet is one of the problems that exists for China. Fascinating area. China defied international law and suppressed opposition in Tibet. Between 1949 and 1979, 1.2 million Tibetans were killed by the Chinese invasions and occupation. In 1976, China initiated a controversial policy of settling ethnic Chinese in Tibetan territory. The Dalai Lama is the head of Tibet, but he left the country in order not to be executed. There have been a number of uprisings. When I was in Tibet, it was by far the most concentrated police and military control I saw in all of China, and in fact one of the largest I'd ever seen in the world. Religion, there is religious persecution in China, particularly Catholicism and Protestantism. There are churches that are open, but many of the leaders and priests, bishops, etc., are approved by the central government. The Falun Gong is an interesting case. It was a religious practice that fuses meditative techniques and a modern set of moral teachings, but it became so widespread that the threat was seen to the government, and so the government declared it as a cult and false science and was violently suppressed. You see a lot of Falun Gong proponents in Taiwan. Tiananmen Square was an important event, which essentially was the massive protests that occurred in 1989. It was suppressed by Deng Xiaoping. Thousands of people were killed. You're not even able to talk about it in China. 31 years later, it was essentially broadcast live throughout the world as tanks rolled into Tiananmen Square and troops fired on the crowds. Hong Kong was supposed to be separate from China. Hong Kong was held by the British, and there was an agreement in 1997. But President Xi has tightened the screws and, in fact, has has essentially put Chinese police and Chinese courts in control of Hong Kong, so that Hong Kong is being fairly quickly merged into mainland China. Hong Kong is technically an island, as is Macau, which was owned by the Portuguese, another independent entity. But Hong Kong is an important business capital, and there were more freedoms in Hong Kong until fairly recently. One of the important disputes between the United States and China, and also China and its neighbors, is the South China Sea. It's a main transit route which goes through this area: China, Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, the Philippines, a massive shipping channel with oil, with fishing, with freight, and China essentially says that it controls most of it. It's lost that battle in the courts, in the international courts, but it continues to hold it militarily, if you will. There have been some skirmishes between the United States and China over that route, and it's going to be one of the flashpoints in the years ahead. One of the things that President Xi has done is what's called the Belt and Road policy, and essentially China went through a massive building boom with high-rise buildings, civic buildings, and so it created this great construction industry. Now that most things have been built in China, Xi decided that what he would do would be to contract Chinese construction projects to essentially link China with Europe and Africa. So there's road building, there are dams being built. It was meant to be a major foreign policy approach to get more people on China's side. It's had mixed results so far, because many of the countries have accepted the assistance, but many of the workers who come in, the leadership, if you would, were Chinese, and there have been a lot of friction in some places. So going back to Hong Kong just for a little bit, there are a lot of things that didn't change once that Hong Kong was under Chinese influence and less under British influence, so that there were English is still taught in the schools. Hong Kong remains an individual member of various international organizations. Hong Kong continues to negotiate and maintain its bilateral treaties. Now, some of this is under a great deal of pressure from China to change. What did change under the agreement between Britain and China? The chief of Hong Kong is now elected by a committee, generally are pro-Chinese. All public offices now fly the flags of the People's Republic and Hong Kong. Secondary schools must teach Cantonese, which is the Chinese language of the South, different from Mandarin, which is the language of government. When it comes to Taiwan, another flashpoint, after the end of World War II, the Chinese Civil War occurred. 1949, the Republic of China under the Communists was formed, and Chiang Kai-shek moved all of his people to Taiwan and made Taipei the capital. 2 million people were evacuated from mainland China and joined the 6 million people who lived on Taiwan. There's been some friction there, but what has essentially happened is that Taiwan has become a booming economic success. The question remains, while the West says that it will defend Taiwan from China, it's an awfully important business site, and the Chinese have always claimed that it's part of China. Again, another friction point that's on the horizon. So here's some myths. You probably heard some of these, and so that China is communist in name only. Well, it is communism digs deep into China, while some say that there's been the growth of the middle class, that there's more looking toward the West. The Chinese system and the Communist Party dig deep into China's society. The second one, the party controls all aspects of China in all aspects of life in China. Well, again, while the party is important, there is some freedom when it doesn't deal with politics. So the Chinese party has recognized that intensive interference into people's personal lives is a liability in building a modern economy. But if you step out of line, you're going to be in trouble. The internet will topple the party, myth number 3. It just didn't happen. There's what's known as the Great Firewall, which keeps a lot of information from Chinese eyes and ears, so that you can jump over the firewall at your risk, but it doesn't allow Western media, Google, pornography, any discussion of attacks on the Communist Party, so that the internet did not bring down the Communist Party in China. The other one, other countries want to follow the China model. Well, not really. It works for a country as large as China, and has had some success, but China's authoritarianism works only because it has the party's resources to back it up, so that not many countries have followed the China model. The party can't rule forever. Well, it can. China's urban middle class may wish for more political freedom, but it hasn't dared rise up in mass against the state, probably because there's too much to lose. When there was a large upheaval in 1989 in Tiananmen Square, it was put down ruthlessly, brutally, and sent a message to anyone who thought that it could attack and bring down the party. So that's it for now. Fascinating country, China, and I hope that you have an opportunity to visit China someday. That's all for now. Thanks, and we'll see you online. Bye now.